Hello, and thank you for joining us for another installment of Behind the Investigation. This is a series that we do every week where we take you into a deep dive of an investigation brought to you by the Atlanta News First investigative team. And we are following a major development to a story that's been months in the making. And I'm joined here by investigator Ciara Cummings. Let's talk a little bit about this because now it appears this is something you've been following for months and has caught the attention of legislators.
Yeah, this is a big deal. So when we first started investigating the Department of Family and Children Services, housing foster children in government buildings, it was back in March of 2022. Our first story, though, aired in the summer. And so you fast forward all the way to 2023, the new legislative session has started. And at the top of this legislative session, there is a meeting. It's called the Joint Appropriations Meeting, where the department heads of all of the major state departments go before a committee and talk about the budget for that department. Tuesday, the Department of Family and Children Services, their commissioner, went before legislators and basically told them everything we've been investigating and showing to our viewers for the last few months, that children were living in offices, sometimes months on end, typically weeks on end. It was depleting resources. The burden for caseworkers was just becoming too much. And so the commissioner, her name is Candace Broche, she told legislators that she is announcing legislative measures that she wants lawmakers to back that would end this practice that we discovered is called office hoteling. And essentially that happens when kids go before a juvenile court judge and they are dealing with some kind of mental or behavioral health issues. The judge has two options typically: send them into state custody or send them to a detention facility. And we found more often than not, judges try to choose what they consider the lesser of two evils, sending them into state custody. So this new legislation would minimize loopholes. It would minimize the amount of kids going into de facto custody. And so that's a really big deal. And that meeting happened on Tuesday. And I want you guys to listen to what the director had to say.
The battle continues, but to win the war, we need reinforcements. We must address the pipeline of children entering our custody and ending up hoteled when they should have never entered foster care. It only takes what feels like a handful of those cases to upend the entire system.
The Department of Family and Children Services, or DFACS, for the first time openly details to lawmakers an issue exposed by Atlanta News First: foster kids living in county offices. Teens doing drugs, fighting workers, fighting each other, no bed, no school. The practice of office hoteling meant kids lived in these government buildings for weeks, sometimes months.
This session, we will offer legislation to fix statutory loopholes, ambiguous definitions, and contradictory terms to better serve vulnerable families, keep more families safely intact, and bolster our efforts to eliminate hoteling.
Atlanta News First revealed Georgia's foster care system was overburdened because kids experiencing mental or behavioral health issues have juvenile court cases which typically end in two ways: go to a detention facility or go into de facto custody. The judge often chooses de facto custody, calling it the lesser of two evils. DFACS Director Candace Broche urged Tuesday.
Those children need health care, not foster care.
Broche outlined for the first time the practice cost the state $28 million last year, adding it also cost an unprecedented burnout of caseworkers and resources.
If we want to end hoteling in this state, we desperately need these changes in state law.
The request seemingly now backed by lawmakers.
I'm confident that they're going to succeed at getting rid of hoteling.
I know that our caucus is absolutely committed, as it is with yours, to ending hoteling in the state of Georgia.
And, watching that video, I guess the question I'm sure a lot of people have is, how did we let it get to this in the first place, that it took so long to respond to in this way?
That is a brilliant question, because the practice, although it's allowed, there's nothing illegal about it. even the director admitted in that meeting that it is in a direct conflict with the mission of the Department of Family and Children's Services. That agency is tasked with protecting kids, yet this practice, it doesn't do anything to protect them. In fact, it kind of victimizes them once again. And this has been going on for years. I mean, it dates back many years prior to any of our investigations. But they considered it a necessity. If you're dealing with kids that have what they call high needs, so they have some kind of mental issue or behavioral issue where they're struggling with suicide or autism, depression, all these things, and their parents feel they can't give them the resources they need, so they've been acting out in school, and now they're somehow dealing with a juvenile court case. What she said so perfectly is that these children need health care, not foster care. They shouldn't be going into foster care because all it takes is a few cases to derail the entire foster care system. Now you've got all these extra kids in foster care, and what do I do with them? If I don't have enough families to adopt kids or foster kids, if I don't have enough group homes to place these kids, what do I do with the kid? And so they're putting them in these government offices, and as you saw, no beds, not going to school, no food. It's just been going on for far too long. And it's really hard to come up with an overnight fix if you feel that it's going to take legislative action. And hopefully that is some kind of solution here. But just to remind people, I think really what's kind of moving the needle this time is people being able to actually see the conditions. It's one thing to hear that foster care is overburdened, we need more access to resources, we need more families, we need all these things. But to see that this overburdened foster care system is resulting in the kids living on carpet and doing drugs and fighting each other, that really tugs at your heart, and that kind of pushes this forward. The need, it becomes now urgent and a priority, just like these lawmakers said after hearing her speech. And speaking of really seeing the conditions, I want to play the initial story that we ran in the summer where we were able to collect body camera, 911 calls, incident reports, really just mapping out the entire chaos that was happening in Fulton and DeKalb counties. And then we would later learn it was also happening across the state. So watch part one that really got the ball rolling on all of this.
It's just incompetency on the state's part because this whole situation is just I'm just being honest.
We got a fight going up in here.
He hit me in my face. My lip is bleeding.
It's already bad enough y'all got us here.
From the police who respond, the unlikely residents housed and staff ill-equipped.
Very unprepared. I had no idea what I was supposed to do.
Fulton County Department of Family and Children's Services turned offices into homes.
It was crazy.
This whistleblower began working at one of the Fulton Defects offices this year as a behavioral aide, staff assigned to monitor a foster child. She thought she was hired to serve kids in dorms, organize units. She says it was anything but.
I assumed there was an area for them to stay in that was more like rooms. It wasn't.
In some cases, blow-up mattresses on office floors. In others, blankets became makeshift beds, wire cots, allegations of unsecured rooms, unsanitary areas, and unsafe conditions. CBS 46 Investigates uncovered reports the properties are plagued by children doing drugs, escaping the premises, stealing site electronics and money, concerns of sexual promiscuity, attacking workers, attacking each other, kids as young as 12.
My child was in her room and two other girls came in to fight her, and no one did anything about it.
We obtained body camera, 911 calls, incident reports, all documenting a pattern resulting from long-term stay of foster teens at the Defects office in College Park and on Fairburn Road in Atlanta. The practice, it's called office hoteling.
We're staying here because they don't have nowhere for us to go, so we're living here.
This year alone, police responded to the offices more than 100 times.
I'm so tired, bro. I'm so tired of coming here, bro. Huh? I'm so tired of coming here. Yeah.
In this particular instance, a teen vandalized the building.
One is trying to make contact. Mr. 7 over here. Looks like a guy.
DFAC staff shows the officer the damage, then takes him to the child. The officer asks the child if she wants to go to the hospital for a mental health crisis.
So I'm just trying to make sure everything good.
I mean, it's not, but it's nothing you can help with.
Ultimately, the child is left in DFAC's office custody.
Hopefully this is the last call.
It wouldn't be. State data reveals this so-called practice of office hoteling was happening even last year, not just in Fulton, but across the state. The data we analyzed shows in 2022, on average, teens stayed 16 days in Fulton offices compared to the statewide average of 20 days. In 2021, on average, teens stayed 12 days in Fulton offices, while the statewide average was 20 days. We found the longest office hoteling here in Fulton was more than 2.5 months, and across Georgia, more than 4 months.
Children are in the room with the door closed, so I open the door. They all sitting out like that at the project somewhere, smoking a big fat blunt.
This whistleblower says she resigned, accusing the agency of systemically failing children.
They feel like they're unwanted because, I mean, they just drop you off in an office when no adult cares about you. I mean, that's what it seems like to them.
State leaders did not interview with us, so we took our findings to the Independent Oversight Agency, which investigates DFACS, the Georgia Office of the Child Advocate, or OCA.
After seeing those places, interviewing those kids, we had an emergency meeting with state DFACS leadership, DHS leadership, and asked that those kids be moved out. DFACS offices are not designed to be places where kids live.
The OCA director, Jerry Bruce, was once a juvenile judge, a former DFACS attorney. He understands the intricacies of the system, which currently has about 10,000 kids in foster care in Georgia.
I mean, no, you can't say it won't happen again.
Here's why. We learned kids experiencing mental or behavioral health issues have juvenile court cases, which typically end in 2 ways: go to a detention facility or go into DFACS custody. OCA claims neither of these options are effective, but judges continue to send kids into DFACS custody.
So what judges wind up doing a lot of times, and it's sort of choosing the lesser of two evils, it's a sort of measure of desperation to try to get these kids and their families help.
However, DFACS then gets overloaded with cases, understaffed with case managers, and cannot find placement for kids, all while facing the historic battle of fewer resources, fewer foster families, leaving a pattern of problems to continue.
It kind of like perpetuates the cycle even into their adulthood.
Yes, even into their adulthood. They just feel like no one cares.
This whole situation is just
And, just seeing some of those living conditions and knowing how widespread this issue is. You even talked to one of these foster care teens about their experience. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's such a nuanced, complex situation. So, when we finally got around to talking to the foster kid, and Maria, you may remember, we wanted to wait until he was 18. So he wasn't a part of the original story. It took us a few more months to get him in part 3 of our foster care coverage. And essentially, he was in the office for a short period of time, just a couple of weeks, but nonetheless, the offices aren't designed for living. And he talked about not having access to education, in some cases, trying to figure out where his food is going to come from, and then just also witnessing the violence that was happening in the offices. And he said something that really stuck with me, really broke my heart. He said, I just felt like it was over for me. Why is this happening to me? And so you have kids that, need help, and it just seems like the exact opposite is happening. And it's not as simple as blaming one person or 2 people or a dozen people. It's a systemic issue. And I think that's what the goal of the legislation is trying to address. How do we minimize the amount of kids that are coming into foster care, specifically the kids that don't actually need foster care but need help? And how do we maximize resources that families can access across the state to help their kids when they are dealing with some kind of mental and behavioral health issues, so we're not perpetuating the cycle of trauma? Because being in an environment like this, if you're a child, it doesn't give you any incentive to get better or to do better, or even it doesn't give you incentive to grow up and be a fully equipped, well-rounded adult, because you're trapped in a cycle, you're trapped in an office, and you're like, what's next? Does anybody care about me? So that's really at the heart of this issue. Another thing I want to bring up that she talked about so eloquently, the director of the Department of Family and Children's Services, she talked about, okay, not only is this a moral and an ethical frustration for me or caseworkers or whomever, financially, this does not make sense for the state. That was the first time that we were hearing the numbers broke down like that. And the fiscal year for 2022, this practice of housing children in foster care offices, it cost the state $28 million. And that money comes because you have to feed, you have to house them, keep the lights on, but also you have to have caseworkers in the building overnight if there's a certain amount of kids. All of that $28 million. And then so far into the fiscal year for 2023, it's cost them $15 million. So yeah, you've got the emotional aspect of this that's heartbreaking, but the fiscal aspect of this, like, it really makes no sense for the state to do with that money. Arguably, they could be doing something else to strengthen how the state responds to families or children who need resources.
Yeah, because you talk about that amount of money, the numbers in the millions, that's enough to look at a legitimate program that doesn't lead to this mental and emotional and just physical toll on these young adults.
Yeah, that's a really big deal. Like, young adults, they're in a crossroads period in their life. When we looked at the demographics, which we covered in one of our stories, the majority of the kids that are living in these offices, they're teens. And the majority of the kids living in the offices are Black and brown teenagers. So when you look at that, it's such a peak point in your life where you decide, who am I going to be, or what do I want to do for a living, or what college do I want to go to? It really is a time in your life where it's your coming of age. Like, you really are, these are your first steps of understanding young adulthood. And so it's just such a vulnerable time in their life, and yet they are stuck. So yeah, this is the time to actually, like, create some measure that catches those kids at a very vulnerable age.
And to that point, we talk about your investigation leading to that legislative attention and leading to the hands of the people that can make a difference. And it taking so long because I imagine, these young children and teenagers have spoken out that the conditions weren't ideal and, dare I say, problematic for them. That it took, almost a year, I dare say, of reaching out, of showing all aspects of this problem to get us to hear this hopefully positive turn in this story.
Yeah, and this is only really the first step, because technically the legislation has not even been filed yet. They've announced that this legislation is coming. They've announced that they want lawmakers to back them, and they've shared those reasons why they feel lawmakers need to back them, that this is a necessity. But really, it's got a long way to go. Once you file the legislation, then it's got to be talked about. You have to have some kind of bipartisan collaboration, and then there's a vote to, see whether this bill actually sees the light of day and gets implemented into the state system. So it's taken so long to get to this point, but also for perspective, there's a much further length of time that we've got to wait on. We don't know what comes next after this legislation is officially filed. I mean, but it is a big deal, and we hope that it's a step in the right direction. And this is the whole point of our job, actually covering the issues that matter to our community and providing a voice to children and even the workers that would have otherwise not been heard.
And part of this has always been the public outcry and the public reaction to the stories you tell. I know this has been a labor of love for you, and a topic that you've been passionate about in your investigation, and that you'll continue to follow it through this hopefully legislative process that it takes up soon. But if for anybody, who may have a similar story or a story they think is worth investigating, how can they reach you?
That's such a good point. And we always say this because this labor of love, this started from a tip. This started from an email. And it took some time. It took some attention. It took a lot of work to actually, have this investigative series air on television the way it did, but it all started from someone emailing saying like, hey, I don't know if this is something y'all are interested in, but this is something that we are dealing with right now. Can you look into it? And so that's always the easiest way to communicate with me. I jokingly say like I am more active with my email than like my actual text messages and my phone. So email number one, at least for me, and it's just my first and last name at wanf.com, Ciara.Cummings at wanf.com, and then all the social media. We are even on TikTok right now. We've got Twitter, Facebook, and our phone number and all that good stuff, our email, it's listed on our website. And then we make it really easy for people. Anytime the investigative team does a story, at the bottom of that story, we post a link where you can contact us submitting a tip. You put your name, your number, and just a brief description of what you want us to look into. But usually some of the greatest work comes from someone second guessing themselves whether they should reach out. So you never know until you try. And I think we are easily accessible. So we definitely encourage our audience to reach out to us via email and social media.
And with that, this has been such a deep dive into this issue and a multi-part investigation. Make sure you check that out. We have a link to it right from where you're watching, as well as on the website, atlantanewsfirst.com, and in the Atlanta News First app under ANF Investigates. Ciara Cummings, thank you so much.
Thank you.